Oh, think I'm back. Hello, I'm back, I think. Um, Sound off if you can hear me. That's dropped the numbers a bit, I think. We were just over 900 viewers and we're now down to 200. Um, there's a few people around. I live, um, if you two are alive, please say so that I know that my audio is actually receiving. Hello? Anybody there? Hmm, that's helpful. Apparently I'm streaming. Let's try. Ah, there we go. I had to close the tab and reopen it. Great. Right, well. That was fun, wasn't it? We are in fact live again. Yes, we are. Um, Sorry, I'm just trying to find some pictures for you so we can go. I'm going to I'm going to leave that. I discovered the source of the problem. Apparently, the replays I've been trying to show are too old, and therefore it makes World of Warships crash. And then when it crashes, it displays the splash screen and won't display. Although there is a terminate function, it hides the terminate function behind the crashed splash screen, so you can't actually exit the blasted thing. And alt tabbing just takes you back to that thing. So anyway, we're going to forget about that for the minute. I think in future replays, I'm going to have to record them and then just play a video. So now, where was I? That's I was trying to find you some pictures, so we're not all bored out of our skulls. Right. Yoop. There we go. We now have a random slideshow. I think this is a slideshow of images taken from my folder for the Bismarck video. So, what's the settings on this? Yep. Oh, what the? The heck? That's it. Right, okay, well I'm going to leave that scrolling there while we pick up on pictures. Right. Krasny Krim, there was a question from the last stream, which was why was Krasny Krim so terrible? I mean, it's not that terrible. It's 29 knots in the 1910s, which is, yeah, okay, fine, it's slower than protected cruisers, but it is faster than armoured cruisers. Weight-wise, it's a bit heavier than the average protected cruiser at the time, but not quite as heavy as some of the armoured cruisers. And yeah, it has it's effectively it's a light armoured cruiser, or light cruisers they were at the time. So it's a little bit slow, but significantly over-armed for its size. It's a Russian ship. The Russian cruisers are weird, to be perfectly honest, until you get to the latter part of, well, yeah, pretty much the latter part of the Second World War, because you have things like the Krim, which are just they're just odd hybrids. Then you get the Kirov, which is an interesting attempt to create a heavy cruiser with a rate of fire of a light cruiser, and they actually end up with a heavy cruiser with the rate of fire of a battleship, which says everything you need to know about that particular design team. So let's see who else we can pick up from picture chat. Right. Yeah, everyone's saying use the task manager. I couldn't even get the task manager to display over the splash screen. I was trying. Okay, so let's now. I'm going to just start. I'm just going to start taking questions from the live stream. Thanks for that interruption. I'll do a dedicated Discord Q&A live stream at some point in the future, maybe next week. So Stafford Thompson, thoughts on the new Type 26 destroyer? Well, frigate, destroyer, call it what you like. I think it's quite capable, and I'm quite enthused by the fact that, well, other people seem to agree in as much as they're buying it, Australia and Canada respectively, maybe a few more will. It's very capable and certainly a worthy successor to the Type 23. I do think the Royal Navy's kind of cheated on this whole thing, though. And when I say that, I bet what I mean is the government promised them lots of Type 26s. They promised them a like-for-like replacement, and then they said, no, you can't have like-for-like. We're going to reduce your order number and make you have a few decent ones and then fill out the numbers with smaller ones. At which point the Royal Navy's basically uprated the design of the, as far as I can tell, they've uprated the design of the Type 26 to the point that, as you say, it's near enough a destroyer. And then they've gone and when they've designed the Type 31E, if you actually look at the Type 31E, its capabilities are pretty much similar to, if not slightly better than a Type 23, and displacement-wise, it's pretty much the same as a Type 23. So what the Royal Navy's kind of semi-conned their way into is getting near enough direct modernised replacements for the Type 23 and the Type 31Es, plus, with the Type 26, a significantly more capable vessel than the Type 23 is. Yeah, I might try and do some more SD50 first. I might try and do some more representations of historical ships in Ultimate Admiral on another stream. Can I play World of Warships? I tried that on the first couple of streams. I tend to get very distracted and meander off. How would World War II... Chris Hopwood asks, how would World War II turn out if the Courageous class had been kept and the G3 turned into aircraft carriers? The Courageous class would have been dead in about 5 seconds, assuming they didn't manage to sink themselves in the interwar period. They, as gunships, they were just bad. If the G3 has been turned into aircraft carriers, that would have been interesting. I mean, quite how the Royal Navy would have finagled keeping the Courageouses and then getting the G3s, I don't quite know. But if they, I think as I discussed in a dry dock, if they'd kept the G3s and turned them into aircraft carriers, they would have got something approximating a Lexington, which would have been quite the interesting capability there. But yeah, I think a question of if keeping the Courageous class and then getting the G3s, I think is basically a question of how would the G3s work as carriers. So the answer being very well, because the Courageous class as built. I mean, I'd kind of want to pay money to see somebody try and complete Furious with its 2 single 18-inch guns, but then I wouldn't envy the poor old people who ended up having to sail aboard the blasted thing. Once again, people who are messaging me on Facebook, I care not for thy opinions. Ay, 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 ay. Right, anyway. That is sorted, right. Da-da-dum. Question time. Victory for cake. Would rebuilding their older battleships have been a better experience than building the Soviet Union class for the USSR? They kind of already had. They'd modernized the Ganguts, however you want to pronounce October Revolution in Russian. I haven't had anywhere near enough vodka to try. Yeah, I mean, it would have provided them with some pretty decent experience, but as I say, they'd already modernised the ships, so there's not a lot to be gained from further modernising some sort of first dash second generation 12-inch gun dreadnoughts. And oh, there's the thing gun. Right. Sorry, the chat decided to suddenly jump around as YouTube live stream chat tends to want to do. I mean, building the Soviet Union class just, well, it was never really going to work out for them. I don't think there's a lot they could have done. Their time to build a battleship that would have had any effect in World War II was the mid-30s, and they didn't get onto it at that point. And to be perfectly honest, the Soviet Union is probably one of the few nations involved in World War II that could completely do without battleships because, well, the Germans don't have that many, but they do have a lot of planes, and as happened with the modernised Ganguts, they mostly got sunk by the Luftwaffe in fairly short order. Edward Kofer says, Admiral Rodzensvensky was wondering, would you have an extra pair of binoculars? Funnily enough, I do actually have multiple pairs of binoculars. It's fairly nice ones with a motorized zoom for bird watching. You've got a few telescopes as well. Got a few cheap and cheerful ones that are nice and basic, and I've got a really nice pair of Zeiss binoculars that I think were liberated from a U-boat, if the labelling on them is anything to go by. But one of the lenses is cracked, so I'm waiting to find somebody who can repair 1940s era Zeiss binoculars. Because, well, using one side, the working side, as a monocular, they seem to be absolutely superb pieces of equipment, which is why I don't want to try the repair myself. Kyle Hardman, what is your opinion on the fortifications surrounding the naval dockyards at Pembroke Dock? Funnily enough, I'm going to be in that area over the Christmas period, so I'll have a look then. But generally speaking, I'm not that impressed with most UK-based shore fortifications. Some of the stuff like the Morello Towers and fortifications from the late 18th, early 19th centuries are relatively impressive for their time period, and you've got a few disappearing mounts and such from the late 19th century that are interesting in and of themselves, but outside of the Dover Straits gun battery, the UK has never really been on the forefront of coastal fortifications, to be perfectly honest. Almost always relying on the Navy itself. Athope CUS Battle of the North Cape, Bismarck versus a 1943 Colorado. Bismarck has speed, but Colorado has 6-inch guns. It depends whereabouts in the battle you're substituting them in. I mean, if you're talking about the two battleships, so you're putting Bismarck in place of Scharnhorst and Colorado in place of Duke of York, if you're dropping Bismarck in at the point that the two ships actually engage, probably what will happen is Bismarck will get quite badly hit and then disappear off into the murk because it has the speed to get away fast enough. If you put Bismarck into the battle right at the beginning, then it's highly unlikely the Colorado ever engages, because whilst the Scharnhorst would shy away from Sheffield, Belfast and Norfolk, I don't think Bismarck would. It would probably just try and blow through them to get to the convoy, or at least engage them. I mean, fair enough, Norfolk's might still knock out its forward radar, but say someone who's sailing around in a Bismarck-class battleship is going to be a lot more confident of taking on those odds than someone sailing in a Scharnhorst. DLB84 Gaming says the old Dreadnought hull is not French, it's a Brandenburg-class hull. Come on, don't shame the Germans into saying they went with Tumblehome as well. I mean, okay, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, it's fair. Now that you say that's probably fairly obvious from the flying deck on the aft section there, which you can slot a third main gun turret in. But still, my point about that hull not supporting wing turrets, I think, stands. Especially since you've got the openings on the forward part of the Tumblehome, which historically were blatantly used for guns, but you can't actually fit the guns in. John Ashley Smith, how about a special on the Solomon Islands battles? They're on the list of special videos, but that list is now getting to be almost as long as the list of ships to review. What's the ship in the thumbnail? I take it you mean the sort of the stormy picture I had up earlier. That is the USS Vermont, a American pre-Dreadnought. Why has that question popped up again? I already answered that. Cody85, if you could build an ultimate fail squadron, what ships would be in it, and who would you make command it? Depends on the era, I think. There's a lot of ways of doing that. If you're doing it in the Age of Sail, the answer is going to be completely different to the Ironclad era, which is going to be completely different to the World War One or World War Two era. Isaiah Nesheim, could you talk about the development of gun turrets? Yes. I'm not going to on the stream though, because I'd be here till it's time to go to sleep. And well, yeah, that's again a special video in and of itself. Nick Walters, the Type 31 is the Iver Huitfeldt class, basically. Yes, yeah, pretty much. Modified version, but yes. I wouldn't be surprised if you find a few inscriptions in Scandinavian languages that have been quietly scrubbed off when when the Royal Navy get them. Simon Fisher asks, question regarding heavy cruisers, how would they have developed without treaty restrictions? Would they have grown into the second generation of battle cruisers? Yeah, pretty much. I mean, you can pretty much see that in the late 30s when all the gloves come off and the treaties collapse. Because in the era of the modern steam and steel battleship and things of that period, there's just a race for the top in terms of speed, firepower, and armor. The battleships are already way up there, and with fast battleships, kind of showing what you can do. And yeah, I mean, you've got the treaty era heavy cruiser, which is either 8 or 9 8-inch guns, generally speaking, unless you're the Japanese and lie through your teeth about what your actual displacement is. But then you've got the B-64, you've got Churchill's 9.2-inch special, you've got the Stalingrad, in the Soviet Union, you've got the Alaskas in America, etc., etc., etc. And although, as I've said, I've changed my opinion over time that the Alaskas are in fact large cruisers, they're all going that way because a lot of those, they're upgunned to a level that, well, in the World War One period they would have been called battle cruisers, but then you look at the follow-ons, the responses, the Japanese when they get word of the Alaskas, they uprate the theoretical armament of the B-64s - B-65s to 14-inch guns. The Stalingrads go up to 15-inch guns, at which point you're entering the realms of battleship armament once again. So yeah, pretty much within, 2 generations of design, they skipped all the way right up to a new wave of battle cruisers. Oh, Hawkeye Storm says, if Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts, if you can get into the debug mode with Control Alt Shift A, you can unlock all the ship's hulls and technologies. Well, now you've told me that. That's going to be an interesting one for the next thing. For the next stream of that nature. Mr. Pushel says, UA Dreadnought made angling more viable in a recent patch. Was angling a thing in historical combat situations? Yes, it was. Not so much for the armor protection value of it, though. When you look at actually things like the Battle of Denmark Strait, for example, is a good one. Both Prince of Wales and Hood are doing what you might describe as angling, but generally the angled approach was a combination of closing the distance as rapidly as possible whilst trying to keep as many guns as possible aimed at the target, which is why both Hood and Prince of Wales were making course corrections to try and unmask their rear guns. And also, if you are closing on your target but you are moving at an angle, if you remember in one of the dry docks I talked about some of the difficulties involved in calculating where your shell's actually going to fall, you've actually created the most difficult scenario for the enemy gun layers and fire control computers that you possibly can, because you have your ship moving towards them but also moving, as well as moving in the sort of fore and up, relative to the observer on the enemy ship. Not only are you moving towards them, you're also moving sideways because you're moving at an angle, which means you're changing your distance, and you're probably changing your speed. Every minor course adjustment is going to vary the amount of speed that's going towards the enemy as opposed to alongside the enemy. And your bearing as well as probably is changing all the time. So you're actually making yourself a very difficult target. So yes, angling was a thing, but it wasn't really so much to try and enhance your armour. Jurassic Aviator, if Jean Bar had been completed, how would Operation Torch go down? Probably about the same as it did historically, albeit that there's more chance the Massachusetts could take heavy damage. Jean Bar had the similar problems to Richelieu in that it was very good at self-crippling, and Massachusetts had problems with incorrect fuses or dud fuses on its shells. So it was a little bit of a bizarre fight where both ships were sort of self-limiting well below their actual combat capabilities. I doubt the French would have taken Jean Bar out into the Operation Torch invasion fleet. That would be one very easy way to get blown up very quickly. I mean, there's a chance that it could have heavily damaged Massachusetts, but the thing is with the Operation Torch landings, even if they had managed that, Massachusetts could have just withdrawn and it would have been a case of sending in the next battleship or two. Jean Bar wasn't going anywhere. Mizman24 asks, the most attractive battleship class in your opinion? Well, that's a bit of a problem because, yeah. Most attractive battleship class. See, most of the most attractive capital ships are actually battle cruisers. So, I mean, I have my weakness for the towering superstructure of Doom, so the refitted Queen Elizabeth would certainly be up there. Vanguard is one I don't actually rate personally. Vanguard's general appearance is very nice. It's kind of like a modernized Hood, but it's far too busy amidships, whereas Hood is much cleaner, which kind of takes it down a few notches for me. Let me think. The North Carolinas look pretty nice. And I've said before the New Mexicos also look pretty good. And I like the Scharnhorsts. I can see the elegance of the Littorios in places, but having a giant wedding cake on your mast and that barbette mounted rear turret doesn't really do it for me. So, I mean, the King George V's they are what they are, but they're not especially. They're not the world's most attractive ships. I think if you're going to take between the refitted Queen Elizabeths, North Carolinas, New Mexicos, and Scharnhorsts, if you go with a Scharnhorst refit with a clipper bow, I'd say of those, the Scharnhorst looked the most elegant, shortly followed by the North Carolinas, whereas the New Mexicos and the Queen Elizabeths would compete for more purposeful. I think the Queen Elizabeths refits have a more sort of solid businessman, sort of workman-like appearance to them. The New Mexicos, weirdly enough, despite overall having a very different hull plan, they do look a little bit more like clippers. It'd be actually very difficult excluding battlecruisers makes it very difficult for me to choose, to be perfectly honest. Bill Cunningham, yes, that is very much. I'm looking forward to that as well. I think I will probably introduce it in either maybe this dry dock, possibly the one after. Get everyone to listen to it, and then we'll put it up as a single, if you will, after that. I'm still trying to work out stereo encoding, to be perfectly honest, because my default audio settings in Sony Vegas are front, center, LFE, and rear. So I've got to switch at least two of those to left and right for that recording. For the rest of you who have no idea what I'm having a kind of one-sided conversation with Bill about, well, you'll find out in a dry dock or two. Nicholas. Okay, that's got far too many umlauts over it. Nicholas Macalane. Him. Niklas, would you consider Prince Eugen's hits effective during the Battle of the Denmark Strait? From what we know about them, to a degree, relatively. Um, sorry, I've got a random window stuck to my mouse. Yeah, so from what we know about them, they were relatively effective. They didn't have any real effect on compromising Hood's combat ability as far as its main guns, propulsion, and armor went, but they did set a few fires which, if Hood had gotten back, would have been causes of fairly major casualties. So, in that respect, yes, they were effective as harassing fire, I would say. Um, I wouldn't say they were particularly effective at actually critically damaging the Hood. Um, right. There's a question there that I can't see because it's. I don't know. I'll find it eventually. Um, M. Bryce asks, was the Karga conversion more expensive than a Kargi-Amagi? Yes, because they had more to take out. It was a battleship. There was a Tosa class battleship. They had to rather extensively redo it. The thing with the Akagi Amagi was you could pretty much keep the power plant as it was, um, and having less armor, there was less to remove. Karga, there was more armor to remove, and to get its speed up to something approaching acceptable for a carrier required an awful lot more work. So yes, it was. Lazy Potato, what would the war be like if Bismarck wasn't sunk? Uh, Depends how it wasn't sunk. Does it get home? Does it just get home and away into French ports? I mean, if Bismarck gets to French ports to shelter with Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, then you've got two major issues. One is the RAF is going to make an even more determined attempt to turn Brest into a moonscape than it already did, which might finish the ship there and then. But secondly, they're really going to be gunning for the ship when it comes to when it comes to the Channel Dash. I think the Channel Dash, if Bismarck is there, the threat is going to be so much they're just going to be all over it. Uh, 11G says, "Are you going to see Iowa while you're in San Diego? She's not too far from Midway." That's pretty. I mean, Iowa, to be honest, is pretty much the reason why I'm going over to that side of the states. Because my original plan was to stick to the east and south coast, so I was going to see sort of Corpus Christi, Baltimore, and such like. Um, but somebody, I think it was one of the subscribers actually, put me in contact with the USS Iowa Museum, and they're quite happy to have me there and to give me some a sort of a tour around the ship. So I can't really say no to that, can I? So I had to move some US cities to round two, and actually that's a point to make, is that for those of you who live near Corpus Christi, Baltimore, the Great Lakes area, San Francisco, and some of the inland states that somehow have acquired warships, don't worry, I will be coming out to see your states as well, or cities. Um, it will just have to be a second tour, which will probably be towards the end of next year, maybe the year after, because I don't have that much annual leave. Jodon Ho, have you covered minesweepers and mine layers? I've mentioned them in passing. I've mentioned minesweeping techniques indefinitely several times in the dry dock. The Abdiel class mine layers are somewhere on the list for next year. So yeah, I've covered aspects of them and their effects in certain operations, but I don't think I've done any videos specifically 5-minute guides on minesweeping and mine laying classes of vessels. Admiral Shear, would you consider doing something on the Ottoman naval buildup of the 1870s? Again, can do. It's a special. There are lots of specials on the list. Um, Kamchatka Comic Relief, John Dunho also says, yes, it is. I do actually have some artwork in the process for Kamchatka, which can then be obviously put on T-shirts and mugs and A4 prints and what have you. I'm thinking of going with the sort of a speech bubble that just sort of says, "I see torpedo boats all the time." Might incorporate a pair of flying binoculars actually now, to come to think of it, and one very confused fishing trawler. But yes, it's just a matter of waiting for that to be completed. Yeah, Yannick73, yeah, if I'm going to try and fix World of Warships for the next live stream, whenever that is, it's just, I apologise, it's been a little while since I did the last one, it's just been a matter of finding the time. I've been very busy doing various other things surrounding my medieval reenactment activities, obviously making content for the channel, and getting hold of a ton of resources and research material that's sitting in front of me now for a couple of big specials in the next few months, because these specials usually take quite a while to do. The Viking Warrior asks, what is your evaluation of the Japanese Navy's rush job post-Midway carrier program, such as BBV, CAVs and Shinano, and what do you think would have been a better idea? Well, as I said before, with the hybrid warships, they're in this place of, they have a function, but if you need that function, you're pretty much already stuffed, so the fact that you have the ships probably isn't going to save you, and obviously it didn't. If they'd used them properly, and if they'd had the remaining air crew and aircraft, there probably would have been some margin in that. But yeah, it was. They ended up spending an awful lot of money and time making these hybrid warships and converting the Shinano, and then, well, yeah, not using them even in the roles they were intended for. If they thought them things through a little bit more, then their most optimal idea for that would have been, as I've outlined in a few dry docks, which would have been to use the Issei and Hyuga. No, not Hyuga. Hyuga is a Congo class. Whatever the other Issei class was. Maybe it was, I don't know. Anyway, using the two Isseis as basically fighter carriers, and then that could have provided extra cap for the carrier fleets to add to the carrier's cap, which would have given them more defensive capability, which they definitely needed. So the hybrid cruisers couldn't really carry that much. Maybe it could have given them a bit more scouting ability after the Tone class started to get bushwhacked by the USN. The Shinano was just a cavalcade of failure from start to finish. And to be perfectly honest, given the way it went down, Shinano's probably one of those weird ones in that it probably would have been a lot more efficient to finish it as a battleship, because if it had been finished as a full-fledged battleship, it probably would have gone to sea with its watertight doors working. And it might have survived that torpedo salvo, and then, well, probably suffered a similar fate to Yamato and Musashi, but at least it would have cost the US Navy a few more torpedoes and bombs than it historically did. Um, oh, I don't know why this thing does a jump every so often. Da, da, da. Okay, I have no idea where where this thing has jumped from. Um, I don't know what it is with this. The YouTube chat just jumps around at random for some reason. Carl Hardman, Drac, how is it best to contact you? Either via direct message if you join the Discord server. I think there's a joining link in the description of most videos, or via email, 5-minute guides, all one word, at gmail.com. I should probably put that in the about section if I haven't already, for the channel. Cessanity, no mention of the Nelson class on the beauty list. I'm shocked. I don't think the Nelson class are ugly, but I'm not going to put them on a beauty list either. They look very purposeful and very aggressive, which is excellent for battleships. So yes, they look good, but I can't say they look beautiful, unfortunately. But as I say, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, which is usually quite painful because things in your eye, yeah, no, just don't. Um, Hammond of Texas. Oh, hello. That's a nice title. Why did the Kriegsmarine never go for triple turrets? Many and varied reasons. Part of it, when you got up to something the size of the Bismarck, was they wanted this big, fancy, fast reloading system, which took up a fair bit of space, and then turned out to promptly break down whenever you tried to run it at full pelt, which was a little bit of a waste of time. Yeah, if they'd gone for a slightly more conventional loading system, then they probably could have fitted triples, kind of like the Littorios, but they didn't, so it is what it is. They did obviously have triple turrets on like the things like the Königsbergs, but they also liked having the redundancy of, well, if you've got 4 twins, that's 4 separate targets for the enemy to knock out as opposed to 3 triples. What's your opinion about the movie Midway? Haven't seen it yet. Haven't had the time. I was away for 5 days in Hungary at the last not this weekend just gone, but the last weekend before that. Um, Again, related to medieval reenactment and taking over some armour and shields that I've been commissioned, or well, volunteered my services to make. And then this weekend I was at the original reenactors market all the way up in Coventry, and as far as I can tell, drove around the M25 asleep on the way back. Kinghouse BD, when's the America trip? It is in the near enough as makes no difference, the first 2 full weeks of April next year. Have a look at the latest Dry Dock episode 68. At the beginning, I go through my itinerary, although on the advice of 1 or 2 people who've kindly emailed me, I may be... Well, they've emailed me and either offered me rides or pointed out some of the nightmares of the TSA, so I may well not be taking some of the flights down the East Coast. I may be going via Amtrak or vehicle, but the dates of being in various cities will remain the same. What do you think of Kenny? What do you think of Norwegian ships during World War One, World War Two? Well, the Norwegian ships, they unfortunately had a lot of bad luck when it came to the Germans showing up in World War Two and pretty much being ambushed. Which was not pleasant. They had a relatively effective coastal defence force for World War One. By World War Two, it was getting a bit long in the tooth. But then again, as I covered in the Free Navy video, what ships that did survive made their way over to the UK, and then they promptly took as many ships as the British would give them and went straight back out there to rough up some Kriegsmarine. So I suppose it depends what you mean by the ships. If you mean the actual ship designs, their destroyer designs were serviceable. Their coastal defense ships were good for early World War One, but not as good as something like the Sverige or the Weinemund class in by the time you rolled around to World War Two. But in terms of the actual crews and the motivation, well, the Stored gave a pretty good accounting of itself in the battle with the Scharnhorst, let's just say that. Kyle Hardman email address, I've just said that. I'm pretty sure the channel about section, hang on, let me pop over to the channel about section. If it's not there, I will be very annoyed with myself. Oh, it is. So for future reference, if anyone does want to contact the channel, if you go to the channel page, the Drachinifel page, where you've got home, video, playlist, community channels, etc. If you go to details for business inquiry, if you go to about, then details, the email address for the channel is in fact there. Robert Williams, if you want to see the Smithsonian Air and Space Museums, I can get you a private guided tour. Are they in DC? I think. If so, I may not be able to get to them. I'd like to, but I may not be able to get to them. Plus, there's something funny going on in DC at the moment, and I don't want to catch it, whatever it is. But seriously, if I can make DC, I will. It's just going to be really tight on the schedule. Chris Hopwood, how would the rest of the Admiral class have fared against the Bismarck class? Well, the rest of the Admiral class was so heavily redesigned that they were almost a separate class compared to the Hood. And then it would have been a question of whether or not they'd been refitted. I mean, so the rest of the Admiral class would have been more heavily protected, so and more advanced systems, pretty much, given that Hood, near enough as makes no difference, didn't get much of a refit in the interwar period. So individually, the rest of the Admiral class would have each stood a much better chance against the Hood than Hood did. But as I say, again, it did come down to whether or not they'd also been modernised in the 1930s. Colin's dead, yes. I'm hopefully very much looking forward to meeting you as well. Shoot Me with Triple O asks, if a Bismarck was captured rather than sent to the bottom, could the Royal Navy do more than use it to stick two fingers up at Germany before cutting out for scrap? Probably not. Apart from anything else, Bismarck would have been built in metric, which would have given World War II era Britain built in it, where everything's built in imperial fits beyond all measure. I suppose they could have used it as a bomb magnet for the Luftwaffe, because Hitler almost certainly would have ordered it to be sunk at all costs, which would have probably bought respite for a lot of other things in the area. Yeah, I think that even just that difference in measurements would have been the cost of maintaining it and manufacturing everything specially for it, would have seen it rendered pretty useless pretty quickly. Plus, you'd have to repair all the battle damage, which would have taken a while. I think it would have been a sort of a prestige piece and bomb magnet. Don't know whether they would have kept it afterwards. Admiral Tiberius, would it be disrespectful or wrong of the Royal Navy to use the name Hood again? I'm torn on that one. I mean, on the one hand, there's been a lot of HMS Hoods in the Royal Navy up to the battlecruiser, and they were generally named to honour the various Admiral Hoods in that have served the Royal Navy. Multiple generations of that family have served in the Royal Navy, so the most famous of which was the admiral of the 18th century Age of Sail period. But there were even Admiral Hoods present at Jutland, or an Admiral Hood. I'd kind of like to see the name reused, but then at the same time, I can see with the catastrophic way their battle cruiser went down, it could be interpreted as disrespectful. Yeah, I'm a bit torn on that. I think maybe give it another 20, 30 years, and then it'll probably be good to reuse it. I mean, they reused Invincible in the 1980s, and look what happened to the previous one of those. They reused Vanguard in the 1940s, and the previous Vanguard detonated in port. So, no, haven't you reused Queen Mary? But yeah, strictly speaking, being blown to pieces in the line of duty hasn't stopped the Royal Navy reusing the name before. But I think with Hood it might be a bit longer before they decide they want to go with that. The Leon Ham. Oh, thank you very much. He says no questions, just a bit of pocket money for the trip. Well, thank you very much. I will use it for that. Yeah, I've run out of iron brew, so I think we're probably going to have to wrap this up in about 10 to 20 minutes or so. Marcel Davis says, "Hey Drac, have you visited U955 in Kiel? If not, are you planning to?" I have not. I am planning to. I actually did have a plan at the beginning of the year to do a whistle-stop tour of Europe when it looked like we might crash out in March, and then it didn't happen, so I kind of put that on hold, had other things to do, and then we didn't leave at the end of last month, and now in theory we might leave in February, March, and I don't have any annual leave that I've got left unbooked for this year until April starts, and then I'm taking 2 weeks to go to the States, so one way or the other I think we're going to end up, one way or the other I'm going to end up having to do a tour of Europe. It's just a matter of whether or not I end up having to pay for a Schengen visa, which, to be honest, depending on the country you go in via, isn't actually that much. It just means you have to go through passport control every time, which could be irritating, but it is what it is. Also, weirdly enough, it's actually cheaper, and who knows whether this will survive the Brexit process if we even do end up leaving Europe. Who knows? Watch this space for election news. Well, don't ask me for election news. I'll just go ranting on about how they're all idiots. But watch some vaguely impartial news service if you can find one for election news, because depending on who wins, will depend on how that all goes. But anyway, yes, I do plan to do a whistle-stop tour of Europe in a similar manner to the States, but I have found that at the moment, at least, it's actually cheaper to fly to the said destination, wherever that is, whether that's Stockholm or Kiel or Athens, from London, usually from Gatwick, and then fly back to Gatwick, and then fly out again to the next destination, than it is to go intercity. Weird, but there you go. Sarek Kuvalo says, "A year ago I thought it'll run out of topics. Now it's planning a video a year in advance." Oh boy, you haven't seen the full list. The full list of ships for 5-minute guides is about 5 to 8 years long. That's one of the main reasons I introduced the whole Patreon upvoting of ships feature, because otherwise you'd have a lot of people very frustrated that they have a ship that they really, really, really would like to be reviewed, and wouldn't be reviewed till about 2025. The 5-minute guides at the very least are going to keep me going for a long time. Chris Hopwood, do you know of the SS Tindarius disaster? Not off the top of my head. Um, oh, I just I just had a quick reminder. Oh no, no. Oh, I suppose I can cover that if you want, but for those of you who are wondering what about that reaction is, I had a quick look to see what it was. A troop ship that struck a mine. Oh, that just sends chills through me. Um, I mean, the fact it's called a disaster. Yeah, I don't know if you noticed when I was doing the Franklin video, but that was not a pleasant thing to research. Um, yeah, I'd rather talk about the just other subjects that were. I mean, yeah, I don't like covering that kind of naval incident if I can avoid it. It has to be done in some cases, admittedly, but there's something about reading about thousands upon thousands of people just getting horribly, horribly killed that's it's not pleasant. Um, no, it's Admiral Tiberius again. Hello. What US Royal Navy heritage names would you like to see used again soon? Heritage names meaning more than 3 successful ships have carried it. I'd really like to see Victory reused, but at the same time, Victory is active, so they can't. Um, US heritage names. The old names from the first 100 years of the US Navy have got to be brought back. I mean, they keep running an enterprise, which is nice, but I don't particularly like the current trend of naming carriers after politicians. Maybe that's my natural antipathy towards politicians in general, but um, they've moved the state naming over to submarines, which okay, fine, whatever. Um, but there are so many good U.S. Navy heritage names, and okay, maybe the name in and of itself to someone who's not familiar with US history doesn't strike a particularly great amount of terror in anybody, but anyone who's familiar with the actual background of those ships would definitely want to see them reused. So I mean, you've got the original 6 frigates. Okay, maybe you don't want to use President or Congress, um, but Constellation, um, for example, that one could definitely come back. Um, Lexington, Yorktown, Hornet, Wasp, uh, Ranger, those kind of things. It would be interesting to see another USS Monitor, another USS New Ironsides as well, maybe for a CGX. I mean, fair enough, that was only there for one. So the problem is with the US ones. Yeah, I think that's probably the ones I'd like to see come back. Maybe grab a few of the Great Lakes ones as well. Royal Navy heritage names. Well, there's so many to choose from. I mean, obviously Ark Royal is good. It's always good to come back. They're bringing back a bunch of battleship names like Valiant, Warspite, and Dreadnought for the next generation of nuclear attack subs. There's a lot of the Nelsonian names that were then obviously reused a couple of times and definitely deliberately reused by Fisher in World War One. Bellerophon, I have a particular liking for. Bellerophon, Neptune. We've currently got a Vanguard. What else could we have? Mars, Royal Sovereign, and I think some of the more bellicose names as well. The late 19th century Royal Navy really pulled the stops out, where things like what should I say? Yeah, things like Revenge were like, okay, that's a fairly aggressive name, but you had things like Devastation, um, and such like that they really weren't pulling any punches with that at that point. I'd like to see those names come back. A lot of the smaller stuff is things like towns and such like. It pretty much is what it is. Um, well, an HMS Birmingham would allow for so many jokes. Weeb extraordinaire. Would the KGBs have been better off with just the twin 14-inch turrets, 14-inch guns in 4 turrets, Does your answer change with hindsight? No. Eight 14-inch guns, not a good armament to be carrying on a treaty battleship. Would have been severely undergunned at that point. Phineas de Cool. Special on Copenhagen raids. Again, on the specials list. That's a random question I've already answered. Phineas de Cool again. Medieval reenactment. I do the same. Cool. Don't know where you're based, but if you're based in the UK, we may have run across each other at some point. UNSC forward onto Dawn. If the Germans cancelled Rheinebung and kept Bismarck and Tirpitz in reserve until the Admiral Shears, Hippers, and I guess the Scharnhorst were returned to service, could they have forced a fleet action against the British Home Fleet in late 1941? Yeah, the British wouldn't have had a choice at that point. Although I can guarantee you, if both Bismarcks were online and once the Channel Dash had taken place, they would have called a few ships back to the home fleet. That would have been a quite the interesting fight. Yeah, if they send that force out, the British have to go and stand against it. They don't have a choice at all. Kemlo asks, when was the first anti-aircraft guns fitted to British battleships? They were generally 3-inch anti-aircraft guns that were used as anti-aircraft guns on the Western Front. They were brought in World War One. Gladiator Z56, any thoughts on Almirante Grau being saved from the scrapyard? Well, that's always good news. Excuse me. You know, my lack of Iron Brute is beginning to tell. Oh, Hadis says 15th century, focused on education and demonstration of weapons and armour. So you're only 1 century off of me. I do 14th century. Late 14th, technically early 15th. I have a wonderful, massive goat's foot lever crossbow that I picked up at the market over the past weekend. I'm having fun with that. Brutal's pick. Are you going to post a video on the IGN for Tarka? Oh, you saw Napalm Ratter's video with the inserted 5-minute guide. Yes, eventually I will, but although I do the occasional 5-minute guide for Napalm Ratter, I keep that audio aside for when I do the 5-minute guide for the ship on my channel, but I don't want to just start randomly sticking 5-minute guides in, because the order that the 5-minute guides go in, apart from the Patreon choice at the beginning of each month, is basically in the order that they were asked for by the subscribers, and I don't want to end up just going, actually no, I'm going to do 5-minute guides in whatever order I choose, because that inevitably will lead to, well, it'll either lead to bias on my part or it'll lead to accusations of bias. Either one is particularly nice. So I'd rather just do it in the completely arbitrary order to which people requested them. So when Furutaga's turn comes around, I'll use the audio for that. The war. Oh, Hyuga was a sister ship. That's nice to know. I was right the first time. I'm not completely nuts. Sorry, Coco Valor. What is the displacement of a Luda class cruiser? Several million metric tons of Omnisire blessed adamantium, I believe. Weirdly enough, I've actually started a 3D print of a Battlefleet Gothic ship earlier today, so I have... Yeah, how did that question come about? And then it's just skipped again. Ah, this is so annoying. Just dump me in a random batch of other questions. Stephen, is there any former RN warship that was scrapped that you really wish was preserved as a museum ship other than Warspite? I think my first go-to at that point would be Dreadnought. I mean, basically the ones I'd like to keep would be the sort of the waypoint ships. So Dreadnought, Devastation going further back. If you're going to keep a battle cruiser as an archetype, probably the Renown. We've got a town class. Maybe keep one of the T-class submarines somewhere. Submarines seem to be remarkably easy to hold up. Animal 16365. Question: the Tillmans that would have been armed with 24 16-inch guns, would they have been too wide for the Panama Canal? Yeah, pretty much. The only way they'd get through the Panama Canal is if they used their gun batteries to artificially widen it by application of high explosive. Yeah, they were not Panamax compliant. Ryan Fowler, do you think they found the Johnston? Yes, I do. The case that was made for why that wreckage was Johnston and not Hoel was down to the fact that Hoel actually had a rather distinctive camouflage scheme, which Johnston didn't have when it went down. The wreckage is definitely from a Fletcher class destroyer, those two being the only two Fletcher class that went down, and the paint that's on there doesn't appear to be carrying the Hoel's camouflage scheme, which by process of elimination means it's the Johnston. Although I would note, they haven't actually found the hull. They found the shattered bits of upper works and a long trench leading even deeper into that deep sea trench. So they found bits of the Johnston, I would say. Kilo 19. I don't see an email in the about area. There should be a See Business Details grey button that you click on to reveal it, or something along those lines. At least that's what it looks like to me. Jeff Radsham says, not sure what refit schedule is for Texas or what's being done, but it's a shame to come all the way and not see her. I agree, but it'll be shut. And to be perfectly honest, given the state it's in, and the fact that they've shut it, I wouldn't necessarily be too confident setting foot on her until they've fixed it. That would be a one way to go, wouldn't it? Fall through the deck of a Dreadnought. Yeah, it is a shame, but hopefully by the time I come back again, they'll have fixed her and I can go on board a new refitted Dreadnought, which would be nice. Space Shuttle Endeavour in LA. I actually saw I think it was the test orbiter when I went to the Kennedy Space Center years ago. But again, if I've got time, I'll see it. But my time in LA I must prioritise going to see the actual warships. Wolfdog Legion. How close was Admiral Rodzisvensky to sinking the Kamchatka? Probably very close at different times. It's a mark of great professionalism that he only threw binoculars and insults at it. Double X Night Driver Double X. How do you think AA guns in World War II compare to each other? So 20mm Oerlikon compared to German 20mm compared to Japanese 25. So the German 20mm had the flak Vierling mount, which was pretty nifty. The Oerlikons tended to come in singles and pairs, but the Oerlikon overall was a slightly superior weapon to the German 20mm. Even that they were very similar though. The Japanese 25 is the Japanese 25 is that kid in cross country running who you lap in the world of AA guns. It's just not. It's more of a we've seen aircraft over there and we're going to make loud noises in its direction gun. There's just so many things wrong with it, and there's a bit of a rant in one of the dry docks, I think, that goes through that in more detail. Okay, so it's 22:39, so I'm going to call it about another 10 minutes or so. So I'm going to try and get through as many of these questions as possible. KRS Consulted. Ever thought of doing an episode on the Baltic Sea naval war in the Age of Sail, especially the galley fleet literal warfare between Sweden and Russia? Yes, I actually have a very interesting book about the Russian Navy in the Age of Sail that I've wanted to use extracts from in specials at some point, but with the way the specials video selection goes, again, time, it's just going to take time for me to get there. Episode on the Battle of Java Sea. Yep. I mean, to be honest, part of the Battle of the Java Sea was covered in the 5-minute guide to HMS HNMLS, however you say the Dutch prefix, Java. It'll probably get its own video at some point again. Yeah, pretty much. You can generally take a blanket answer to any kind of major naval campaign or battle in the late Age of Sail through up to the end of World War II is yes, I will eventually cover it. No, I don't know when, other than at some point. Jurassic Aviator, they should have named one of the QE class HMS Somerville or Cunningham. I don't think we've ever named aircraft carriers after admirals. They tend to get the battleships. So I guess these days that would mean the nuclear missile subs. We don't have that many of them. Maybe they'll get in on the next generation of nuclear submarines. Santiago Trujillo Tobon asks, what do you think the Ottomans would have used the Agincourt for if it had arrived before the war? Do you think the Russians would have planned an Operation Sinker? The Russians would have loved to try, but until they got the, I think it's Imperatia Maria class dreadnoughts, they wouldn't have had anything really capable of doing so, although they were training their pre-dreadnoughts to operate in squadrons to counter enemy dreadnoughts, which actually worked to a degree against the Goeben and to a lesser degree in the Baltic. As for what the Ottomans would have done with it, they did have that secret treaty with Germany, so they might have tried to use it to break the Gallipoli campaign if that had gone as it did historically. Although the Russians probably would have been the bigger scare. Ironically enough, Moltke, the Goben's actually better protected than the Agincourt. Even though one's a battlecruiser, the other's a battleship. Theory Drac is a Scot. No. My family spent a lot of time fighting the Scots in the middle of the last millennium, and my wife is of Scottish descent, but I am not a Scot. And if I tried to do a Scottish accent, I'd probably have somebody drive down 500 miles from Edinburgh purely to punch me in the face for trying, because it's terrible. My Scottish accent is not the most convincing. Switch from the Iron Brew to the gin. That would involve me having to get up. Also, I've got to work tomorrow. Hadis leave the EU, you're in Europe, silly Brit. No, we're not. We're an island off the coast of Europe. We're not in Europe. France is in Europe. Germany is in Europe. We're an island on the edge of Europe. There's the channel between us. I mean, yeah, if you go back 14,000 years or more to when there was a land bridge, then we were in Europe. Right now we're next to Europe. Joe Blow Drac, do you think the UK needs a larger navy? Yes. Definitely. But that would require a competent government with a reasonable idea about how to manage defence spending. And when was the last time we had one of those? Even my memory doesn't work that well. Joe Blow, also, are the Royal Navy F-35s a good idea? Well, they're better than nothing. They're probably about the most capable aircraft you're going to get onto a QE at the moment. If they designed the QEs with catapults from the start, and given how emails is going at the moment, I probably should have. If they designed them with steam catapults from the start, there'd probably be an argument for something else, or maybe a mixed air group. They could have used, well, for a start, they could have used the non-VTOL F-35s, which are slightly more capable. And if they'd had the catapult capability, I think there probably would have been a reasonable case for a navalized Typhoon, both to help with commonality with the RAF, to get the planes in service sooner, so the ships had an air wing sooner, albeit they are only just about entering service anyway, but so there you go. But also the Typhoon has some capabilities the F-35 doesn't, so a mixed air group of F-35s and navalized Typhoons would have been nicer, I think. 11 Bravo Crunchy, when are you going to invite the mighty Jingles on to share some sea stories with you and your community? That's a good point. I probably should do that at some point. I mean, this is the funny thing, I've met Jingles multiple times just as a member of Joe Public. In fact, he's even mentioned me in one of his videos, because when I gave him something. Actually, since he says my actual name, maybe I shouldn't tell you what I gave him. But I was featured by name in a Mingles with Jingles episode at one point, so maybe if someone works that out, I'll give them a prize or something. Who knows? That's not an invitation to go snooping through Jingles videos to try and work out my real name and dig up my private life. Please don't do that. That's creepy. But no, I do. At some point, I should get Jingles around. It'd be very interesting to actually interact with him on a YouTuber to YouTuber level instead of a member of the public fan. I do remember watching the level of number of people who wanted to meet Jingles going up and up and up every Tank Fest and having a good laugh with him about it. Though it was quite funny. Black Jackal, when you get around to doing a video on Belfast, will you have footage from a tour of the ship like you did with Victory, or will it just be a regular video? I will go and do a tour of the ship. I don't think I've got any excuse, to be honest. It's one train ride away from me. I can literally near enough take a train for 5 minutes from my front door to 5 minutes away from Belfast. I think you could quite rightly demand my head if I did a Belfast video that didn't involve me going to the ship. Uncapping Badger, how prevalent was HE spam against larger capital ships by destroyers and cruisers? Was it effective, or did they stick with AP at lower gun calibers? HE spam was very, very common, again, used by larger ships. No, sorry, how prevalent was HE spam against larger ships? I thought you were talking about the other way around. By destroyers, they didn't really have much of a choice. A lot of destroyers didn't actually carry AP. At best, they'd carry semi-armor piercing. Having armor-piercing destroyer caliber rounds was actually relatively rare. So, by default, most destroyers would HE spam larger ships. Cruisers depended on the cruiser. I mean, the AP round of an 8-inch gun can still do something nasty to the upper works of a battleship. But HE was used a reasonable amount. Ow. What else have we got? We're closing in at 11 o'clock. Darren Turk, what your opinion of USS Guyat, and if its guided missile conversion was effective? Well, that's a gearing class. So watch this space. I think the gearings are up in about 2-3 weeks' time. As a guided missile destroyer, well, there's not that many first-generation anti-aircraft missiles that you can say were particularly effective, and I think a gearing class is, much as they're very good gun destroyers, just over 2,000 tons is not big enough to to get an effective guided missile ship. As a test bed and a proof of concept, yeah, fine, but as an actually effective combatant, no. No, it'd be better with more rapid fire 3-inch at that point. Ronan Snyder, quick question about the Hood. If it did get a refit and the deck armour upgrades in time for Bismarck, would it have made much of a difference to the fate of Hood? Given the path, the most likely trajectory of the shell that sealed Hood's fate, which is actually a video that at some point I will make, probably Q1 next year, where I go through. I want to go through all the possible permutations and theories behind what killed Hood. But given the one that I think is the most likely, yeah, it would have made a difference. It probably would have saved the ship. It wouldn't have been the deck armor that saved it, but the upgrade that was planned for it would have saved it. I've actually managed to get hold of a copy of the documents that show the 2 potential major refits they were planning for to modernise the Hood, which go into that in a fair amount of detail. So there's probably actually a completely separate video in there just talking about the possible combinations of refit that the Hood could have received, which again will probably be Q1 next year. It might be accompanying, it might be the week before or after. But I was very pleased to find that particular set of documentation, because it's rare as hen's teeth. You can find bits and pieces of it on the internet, but not the whole thing. Where on the list is the video on the final British heavy cruiser designs? I think the County class I've already done. If you mean the designs, as in Churchill's 9.2-inch special, if I remember the overall list here on the PC rightly, it's something like a year and a half, 2 years away. Bud Guy 8829 pointing out the CGI in the Midway movie is necessary, since there's not really any of those aircraft flying around anymore. Yeah, and to be honest, even if they were, I severely doubt you want to take a 70-year-old Dauntless into a power dive. Daniel Holland, how have you calculated 8 years it would take to complete the current 5-minute guide list? That's because I've got a list on my PC, which is slightly different to the list that's displayed under the 5-minute guides, in that it's much longer, which is basically when people mention a ship that they'd like to see reviewed, I just go and add it to the bottom of the list, and then just double check to see if it hasn't been requested already. And then we've got 52 weeks in the year, so I just divide the number of rows by 52, and that kicks out a figure that's about 7 to 8 years long. Granted, some of those are individual ships as opposed to classes, and as you hopefully know, I prefer to do the class video before I do the individual ship video, and sometimes I do doubles when I've got the time. Plus, also, well, our ancestors built an awful lot of warships. There was over 300 ships at Jutland. I mean, that if I just covered each ship that was at Jutland and its class, just that would run 6 years. And even if I just did the individual classes, that would probably be near enough a year. Yeah, Haida will be one on the second trip. HMCS Haida. The Waraboo, in your opinion, what is the best class-single pre-dreadnought battleship? It seems hard for me to figure out, since they all seem to be the same, except for experiments and the same general layout. Well, it's going to be one of the very last generation ones, isn't it? Because the previous ones, the secondary battery was kind of hovered in the 6 to 7 inch range. The last generation you had sort of 7.5, 9.2, and 8 inch, and whatever weird caliber the French were coming up with on that particular morning as secondary guns. I mean, the Lord Nelsons were very capable. The Connecticuts were quite capable. The Dantons, in at least on paper, were very capable. This is the weird thing, I think, as I mentioned in the Danton video itself. They were incredibly advanced, and you could probably make a serious case for the Dantons being one of the most capable classes of pre-Dreadnought. They were just built at a time when the pre-Dreadnought was 2 or 3 generations out of date, which is a bit of a shame. Chris Hopwood talking about the troopship disaster, and no one actually died. Oh, that's a relief. Okay, so yeah, maybe I'll cover that in the future then. Cool. Well, that's made my day a bit brighter. That's nice to have a ship sinking without people dying. Um, Joe Frankic, I think you never talked, or Franek, sorry. I don't think you never talked about the Silent Hunter games. Did you play any of them? No, I didn't. They came around at a time when I wasn't really into playing that kind of game, unfortunately. I think when the Silent Hunter games were in their heyday, I was mostly annoying people as a pyro in Team Fortress 2. There's a lot of commentary. Got 4 minutes or so before I have to. I think I need to go to bed. HMS Leviathan would be nice. Yes, it would. And yes, don't worry. I'm hunting down sound effects to do the Thunderchild chapter from War of the Worlds read through. I thought that would make a nice December video special, amongst others. Um, Green Bean, do you think USS Yorktown could have been saved if it spent more time in repair instead of 3 days, or do you think it was a necessary risk in hindsight? Given the number of flight decks the US Navy actually brought to Midway, they pretty much needed Yorktown there. Um, and to be honest, the main damage that meant it needed the 3 months of repairs that it didn't get was to the engines from the bomb that had near enough as making no difference, almost gone straight down the funnel. Not actually, but near enough. If it had got those engines repaired, then yeah, it probably. I mean, you can't never always say it absolutely would have survived. I mean, Lexington was in tip-top fighting shape, and look what happened to that. Um, but certainly, being able to move at full speed would have made it a harder target, and it would have been in a different place. 11 Bravo Crunchy, are you planning a video discussing the types of World War II US Navy PT boats? Yes, I am. I'm not sure. Again, I'm not sure when that's gonna happen. But see, the thing is, with the individual PT boats, it's difficult to do a 5-minute guide on a PT boat class because they're much of a muchness, to be honest, a lot of the time. I think I might have to do a light craft special overall, or maybe a series of them, where maybe sort of one will be the MTBs and MGBs, one will be the E-boats, -S boats, -R boats, whatever you want to be calling them from the Germans, another one on the Mars boats from the Italians, and then another one on the PD boats of the US Navy. That might make a nice series of videos to release over a month, but that's going to take a lot of time to research because, unlike some of the specials where you're looking at one battle or one ship, with that I'm going to have to be looking at multiple ships. It's kind of probably going to be kind of like the destroyer development videos, which sort of seem to come out once every 2 or 3 months because there's just so much work having to find brief descriptions of dozens of classes of destroyers and then try and work out how to condense the vital points down to a few paragraphs. On board G1 Ironbrew, didn't think it was like south of the border. I love the stuff. I may be somewhat unique in that round here, but I do like it. Uncapping Badger. Did the Royal Navy have any plans for battleships armed with 18-inch guns? Yep, the N3 class. Arthurian Legend, yeah, that'd do well. Would Santiago Trujillo Tobon, would you be open to making a guide or special on HMS Thunderchild in its different appearances in media? I'd be open to making a guide or special on HMS Thunderchild and its theoretical configuration, especially if I can find somebody who's much better at me actually drawing to illustrate how I conceive of the Thunderchild. Not so sure about its different appearances in media, to be honest. Because I mean, to be honest, in any media that's worth reviewing, it shows up as a pre-Dreadnought battleship, and everything else is either absolutely awful CGI that will melt the eyes out of your sockets, or just no. There's a number of different things in various quote-unquote modernised versions of War of the Worlds that I use in place of the Thunderchild. I've never, ever captured the true spectacle of Thunderchild herself as written. EU discussion, I'm not touching that. As far as I'm concerned, my opinion of the EU and UK and all of that is limited purely to geography and how likely it is we're going to end up in another naval shooting war, which hopefully is not. Right. Okay. Polish submarines, or at least ORP Orzel. Orzel's getting its own special. Orzelski, I think I can see where you're coming from with that. Orzel is definitely getting its own special at some point. And so it's just gone past 11 o'clock. I'm going to answer one more question. And then I think I'm going to go to sleep. Which one should we take? Dun, dun, dun. '99 Iron Duke. Could you please do the light cruiser HMS Caroline at some stage? She's the last survivor of Jutland in 1916. Yes, your wish is my command, because someone requested HMS Caroline a long time ago, and it's coming up on the list, which its place in the list roughly corresponds to the end of this year. but I haven't done the C-Class yet, so her slot for that week will be taken by the C-Class, much like the upcoming John R. Craig is a gearing. I haven't done the gearings yet, so you'll get the gearing class first as a 5-minute guide, and then the John R. Craig the next week. So similarly, the C-Class will come around at the end of the year, and I'm looking into if I can pop over to Belfast in the beginning of the new year to have a look around Caroline and do a video tour. So Caroline again will get a guide. It's definitely going to be more than 5 minutes, although it will occupy the Saturday slot. And yeah, I will do a video guide going around the ship, which will be quite interesting since, as you say, it is the last survivor of Jutland. And there's one more. Oh, okay, fine. And then after this question, I am definitely going to sleep. Budguy8829 asks, what do you think would happen if the Bismarck was like the Yamato? The German shipyards would be scratching their head as to how the heck they actually built it. This was one of the major problems with the H-class, various H designs. H-39 was plausible. H-40-41 was pushing the boat out a fair bit, and anything beyond that was basically pure fantasy because the German dockyards weren't physically large enough to build the ships. You would have ended up building with two dockyards, building two halves of a battleship, and then trying to work out some way of sailing two individual halves of a ship around, and then welding them together, which would have been some massively disastrous weakness because the kind of modular construction they use these days in a lot of ships had definitely not been perfected at that point. But yeah, plausible realism aside, if Bismarck had been built in secret as the Yamato-sized vessel, lots of bombs. I don't think the Royal Navy would have quite relished engaging it straight up without massive aerial assault first. They would have thrown the kitchen sink at it to try and stop it, and they would have made definitely sure that if it ever came out, you wouldn't have had a case of King George V and Victoria staying home. You would have had every single ship the home fleet could muster going out to form one massive battle line against it. On the other hand, if the Germans had decided to waste what effectively would have amounted to half of Bismarck's worth of resources in building an even bigger version, that probably would have helped the overall war effort somewhat. So they wouldn't have objected too much on that count, I think. And on that note, since it is now coming up to 10 past 11, and I do actually have to work tomorrow, I will bid you all adieu. Thank you very much for tuning in. I apologise for the absolute mess up that was trying to run a World of Warships replay. Hopefully we will not have that happen again, and yeah, look forward to seeing you in other videos and other streams. So hopefully we might get another stream in next week. So thank you very much, everybody, and now I can see if I can find the stop broadcast button. Good night.